And now to talk more about the implications of today's earthquake and tsunami in Japan, we are joined by Alex Drashevsky. He is founder of Recovery Partners and an expert on debt restructuring. In the early 1990s, he helped turn around the portfolio management operations for the government of New Zealand and sat on the board of the New Zealand Earthquake Damages Commission. Welcome back to the program, Alex.
Thank you, Howard.
Thank you. So, what did the board of the New Zealand Earthquake Damages Commission do?
Well, the EQC in New Zealand was set up in the wake of the very severe earthquake in Napier around about 1932, which devastated the entire town, lifted the surrounding countryside by a height of about 3 meters, and caused took a huge gouge out of the economy. So they set up a funding mechanism to smooth the economic impact of earthquake-type events.
Like a stimulus program?
Yeah, they swang into action following the event in Christ, very unfortunate thing that happened in Christchurch on February 22nd. And basically, they used the money to allow the rebuilding to occur almost immediately rather than having to fund. They maintain a portfolio of offshore investments for that purpose. And I'm sure in Japan, the authorities have similar contingency measures. The emphasis on earthquake preparedness in Japan is very, very acute. We lived there for a couple of years. We still have relations there.
In Japan?
My sister-in-law is currently trying to figure out if her family's okay, but we expect that to be the case. They're in Tokyo, which was pretty far from the epicenter. But the earthquake preparedness in Japan is quite high. It's going to take a few days for all of this to shake out, but they will be moving forward with reconstruction plans very, very quickly, I imagine.
And so that brings me to my next question, because obviously it's going to require a lot of money in terms of, we don't know yet, but in terms of rebuilding structures and so forth and infrastructure. Given the indebtedness that Japan already faces, albeit domestically, it's the Japanese who hold the Japanese paper predominantly. What is the significance of this?
Well, couldn't have come at a worse time, because Japan is currently on track to have, it has the highest debt to GDP ratio in the world right now. Save a few basket cases, it's around 210% of GDP, which is about double what you'd expect in a crisis situation. But again, it's a circular flow. They owe the money to themselves. What this has implications for is the treasury market, because Japan, along with Great Britain and China, are the world's largest foreign holders of treasury paper.
U.S. treasuries.
U.S. treasury paper. Given that Japan is already running a budget deficit of around 10% of GDP, one of the alternatives they have for funding the reconstruction is to lighten up, or at least reduce their purchases of treasuries. So this will have some implications for potentially another round of QE in the United States. It could have potentially.
This could cause another round of quantitative easing.
Not by itself. I would say it would be a factor that would go into the decision making in the United States, but. For the Japanese, they have a funding issue. They have to decide how they're going to fund the reconstruction. Already being at 210% of debt to GDP at home, already looking at a 10% budget gap, looking at aging population, shrinking tax receipts, and the fact that they have very little fiscal room to maneuver opens the possibility that they could become net sellers of treasuries. Obviously, this becomes a political issue between Japan and the United States, but it's one issue that's now needs to be resolved over the next weeks and months in terms of how the reconstruction is to be funded.
And so that would add to what we've been hearing earlier this week about pressure on U.S. treasuries. People like Bill Gross, PIMCO lightening up. People saying China should lighten up.
Yeah, Bill Gross lightened up because he doesn't think there will be a QE3. I happen to take the opposite view. I think whether or not this earthquake happened, there's probably going to be a QE3, because the Fed and the Treasury are in a very, very tight box here.
You mean you just can't stop once you're on the
drum?
They're on
a bit of a treadmill. They're on a bit of a treadmill here, Howard. Oh, yeah, no question.
There aren't many people who are saying now that QE3 is coming. People are more or less expecting that come June, that's going to be it.
It's not a given. It's not a given, and some of the clearer heads at the Fed are also starting to think of some of the implications of all this QE and are arguing against it. It's not a given, but Mr. Bernanke has staked his position on this policy. He's basically said, this has got to work, and it will work, and here are the reasons it's going to work. I don't see Mr. Bernanke retreating from that position very easily, nor do I see his supporters at the Fed retreating from that position very easily.
So you think that's how when he's watching these news reports from Japan now, he's thinking about potentially the QE3?
Well, no, I think U.S. policy is extremely North American centric. They don't much, they're setting policy to achieve outcomes in their own economy. They're not necessarily setting policy to achieve outcomes for Japan in respect of its reconstruction.
No, but if Japan has to lighten or chooses to lighten up on treasuries, then he's got an issue, doesn't he?
Well, the Treasury has a funding problem because the marginal buyer of treasuries, excluding the Fed, is outside the country. So they need to keep these people interested in buying. It's not even lightening up. Just stopping the purchasing program has dire implications because between China, UK, and Japan, they're buying half the treasuries on offer. So if they stop buying, somebody else has got to step in. So far, it's been the Fed.
Just a couple minutes left, and what we usually talk to you about is Europe and what's going on with European sovereign debt issues. There's a meeting today. There's a big meeting the 24th and 25th. We had the Portuguese bond sale earlier this week. They had to pay a lot more. Greek credit default swaps were at a record, correct me if I'm wrong, earlier this week. Where are we now on this?
Well, Howard, you asked me last summer where I thought we were, and I thought we were at the beginning or in the middle. I think we're in the middle of something that's probably got several more years to run. We could get a break sooner rather than later. Greek debt is now at unsustainable levels. The Greek taxpayer has said he doesn't want to pay user fees anymore. This is the type of cycle that started in Russia when government revenues fell off a cliff in 97 and 98. And even with a very low debt load, the Russian government ended up defaulting towards the end of 98, towards the end of the summer of 98. Greek bond levels, in terms of where they're able to fund themselves now, aren't sustainable. They're not sustainable in the context of a long-run, stable debt management profile. Something might break there. And the problem is that the Europeans haven't been able to come to an agreement on a number of issues. They're still arguing about the size of the EFSF. They're still arguing
European Financial Stability
the European Financial Stability Fund. The purpose of the meetings also is to talk about what's going to replace the EFSF in 2013 and also what the EFSF can be used for, i.e., can we start buying sovereign bonds as part of the EFSF facility, or do we leave that with the ECB? And the other thing they're looking at is the fact that the EFSF is too small. It was originally announced as a 440 billion euro facility. It turns out because of the collateralization they've got supporting the structure that they can actually only do about 255 billion. So they're also talking about ramping up the size of the EFSF, which is something we discussed the last time here. And that was over a month ago. They still haven't agreed on that. So whether or not they're going to be successful, I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. It's very doubtful.
We have to leave it there. Great to have you back with us, Alex. Many thanks for coming in.
Yeah.
That's Alex Truszewski of Recovery Partners. Any comments about the show, send us an email at headline@bnn.ca. You're watching Headline on BNN.